And now we actually will fill the post with real data. Well, actually, first with fake data that we generated earlier. So as mentioned, we're using Bloc Cubit in order to manage state. Basically, we're just getting state from Rust. We're not really doing anything in those qubits logic-wise, but we're basically just still interacting with Rust via these qubits. And so we're going to create a few of those. First one we're going to create is a post qubit. And so that now got created over here. And first let's look at the state. And each post will have a post ID no matter what. So even if a post got removed, right, we still will know what the original post ID was, and the same goes for the URL. So let's go ahead and generate the constructor for those. And then in here, we actually have a post that's currently active, meaning we are currently watching it, right? And so that one will actually have a post, right? Obviously, because it's active, it's watching. And so we have to import this. And okay, and then we're going to have to create the constructor for this. And we're going to have to initialize a super with the post ID or ID, and then the post URL. Okay, so now we got the state set up. And we are going to have another state later on where the post got removed and it's no longer active, but we don't worry about that for now. Now the next thing to look at is the post qubit. And the post qubit, we don't do much at this point yet. So we're just going to get a post, right? And so we create a post active from the post. And that's all we need there for now, because we will add functionality later. Now the next thing to do is to add another qubit which handles the posts, like the list of posts, right? And so let's create that one. And now we should have a post qubit and a post state. And again, we're going to look at the state first. So the post state is basically never changing, because we'll always have a list of posts. Even if it's empty, it's still going to be a list of posts. So the structure of that class doesn't need to change. We don't need multiple ones. So let's import this and implement the, well, didn't allow us to import that for some reason. All right. And then we are going to create the constructor here. And that's all we need to do here. And since it's not changing, let's make this const. And then we're going to implement the qubit. So post qubit. And here we're going to do a few things. So first of all, when we start up, we don't have any posts yet. So we have a post state, and it's going to be empty for now. Like the posts are empty. But then what we'll do is we have a way to refresh the post. So we can't do that immediately. We can't do this right here. We have to actually do this in the constructor here, because this requires accessing the store, which we get here. We get store instance, and then basically what we'll do is we'll refresh, and we create ourselves a method, and we're putting this in a separate method because we'll most likely call this from elsewhere later. So first of all, we have to get the posts, right? And so the store will have them for us, right? And we're getting, so the posts, right, is basically a full hash map, right? So the hash map that we created on the Dart end, let's just revisit that for a second. So the hash map that we have here, right, got perfectly mapped to the hash, basically a Dart hash map, right, on the Dart side, right? And we didn't have to worry about that. We didn't have to worry about kind of, locking the store or anything. That all is done for us in this case. So we get the stores, but we don't want it as a hash map, we actually want the values out of it, and we pull that out into the list. And then actually what we want to do is sort them, because we want to show the most recently added post on top, right? So we're going to sort b, and we're going to look at the scores length. So whoever has the most scores, right, is most likely the oldest, right? So whoever has the smallest number of scores should be on top. That's how we could be a little smarter and look at the timestamp, but this works for now. And since no one will know what this will mean in the future, add a comment here. And now where we got those, we have to emit a state update. So post state, and we're going to pass in the posts. And then we have to call this refresh method from the constructor, right? And we couldn't do this here because we couldn't do this like kind of here like we do for the super, because we are accessing an instance variable here, store, to do that. Yeah, it's actually cleaner that way anyways. And that's pretty much all there is for this one. So now that we have the qubits prepared, we can build the correlating views. So we have a qubit for the post, and we have a qubit for the posts, and we'll build views for each of them. So views, we start with the post, and actually these views are quite a lot of boilerplate. So it's probably not the best use of our time for me to type this out. Instead, I'm just pasting in what I prepared previously. Let me just walk through the code. So here we have the post view, and it depends on the post qubit, and the state, it depends on the post state, right? So there are two cases here. Either the post is active or it is not active, right? So if it's not active, that means it somehow got removed, but it was still on the list for some reason. So in that case, we just have to render that it was actually removed until this gets kind of, if it catches up and is actually removed from the list. And then here we get the post out of the state if this post is active, and we wrap all of this in a dismissible so we can actually remove the post. We need a key because the dismissible needs a proper key. Then here we have an igmal, and that goes along with this title here, which we render kind of like a link. And we're going to see that in a second, in order to indicate that you can actually click that and open that in the browser later. That's not implemented yet, but we can implement that later. And then down here we have the subtitle as a sized box to basically show the scores in a chart, which we don't have yet. And then obviously, since we want to be able to click it and open in the browser, we have an on-tap method, but we didn't implement that yet. And that's pretty much all there is to the post view. And now we can go ahead and do implement the posts view. So let's do that. Posts.dart. And again, I'm pasting that in, and I'm just going to walk through this. So in this case, we have a posts qubit, which basically gives us information about all the posts, and later allows us to interact with them. And then we wrap that all in the list view builder. Basically, give the posts as that's going to be what we're going to be iterating through. And so here we pull out the post, and then obviously, since the post view depends on the post qubit, we have to provide it. So we will do that here. And we're already wrapping this in a multi-block provider just so it's easier later on to add more providers. Since I did this before, I know that we will have more providers here eventually. So that's pretty much all there is to those views. And obviously now also we have to hook this all together. So let's jump to our main file and do that. So first of all, as we saw, we need a post qubit provided, right? So let's do that first. So here we need to wrap that, and we're going to again wrap that in a multi-block provider, since I know that there will be more providers that we'll need here, and then we can actually take this one, provide this as a child. All right, and then we need to obviously import the library. All right, And now we can give it the providers. And in this case, we will provide the posts qubit. Great. Posts qubit. We just construct it like this. And that's this part. And then obviously down here, we need to provide the actual posts view that we just created. So posts view, and that should now have gotten, it hasn't gotten, okay. Okay, so it seems to be fine. Should we save all of this? Yep, okay. So we should actually be ready to run this now. And then be able to see our one little fake post that we created in the UI. So let's hope that this works. All right, so we're starting up and we see our first fake Reddit post here and where the charts will go. Obviously, if we click on this, nothing will happen because it's not hooked up, but that's how far we got at this point. And let's move on now to actually show a chart here. In order to render this chart, we are going to use a library for that, which is called charts, as one might expect. Unfortunately, there's a problem with the current version in Flutter 2.5, which just got released, and I already updated to that. There's a compatibility issue. So basically, it doesn't work with the latest Flutter. They fixed it already in the repository, but the version wasn't published yet with that fix. So what we'll actually have to do is we'll have to, first of all, close this one, and then we'll actually have to manually pull this down. We can't install this from pubdev. So what we'll do, we'll just take this, right, and we'll just clone it. But it's a very large repository, so I'm going to say that I want to only clone, like, I don't want to clone all the history, and we're going to put that in devs charts. Clone. And then we're going to go ahead and remove the Git folder, because we don't need the history at all. And then I'm going to go and remove a few things from our check-in, because we're going to check this in, and we don't need everything like that has nothing to do with running, right? So we're going to remove the docs, the example, and the tests. So that we can basically check that in with our repository without checking in too much code. And additionally, we need to add that to our pubspec YAML as a dependency. So it's a little different than just adding it with the version if it's from pubdev. What we actually have to do is we do charts Flutter, and we'll provide a path, instead of a version. So it is there, and it's charts Flutter. That's the library actually we're pulling in. Okay. Now we are good with that. And now, in order to show some scores, we'll add some fake scores to our fake post. So let's go here, and again, this is something we don't need to type out. I already prepared that, and let's import the score struct that we already prepared. And now we can see that we just add a score every 10 seconds here, and kind of vary them going up and down. And now all we have to do is use them in our post. And that's what we'd have to change here. And actually, let's go ahead and bindgen, and we actually don't need bindgen because we didn't change the API. All we have to do is run the build again. And now we're going to go to our post view where we want to show the chart. So let's go to our post view where we are going to render that chart. First of all, let's import the charts library that we're going to use. Pitch, charts, Flutter, start, and we're going to import that under charts. And first we're going to write us a function that converts our data, right, our scores data, into something that the chart library can render as a line chart. So let's do that. We call it chart data. And what it does, it takes a list of scores and then spits out that format. And so it's pretty straightforward. So we need to import the score here. All right, and it's pretty straightforward. So basically, obviously I got this from the example from their website too, how to do this. So you do this, right? And you then give an ID. So we give it scores, and the color function we don't do at this point, but the main thing is that we need to tell it how to get how to basically get the x-axis and how to get the y-axis. That's pretty much what those are. So here we got the since we have a list of scores, this is going to be our input, right? And then we are going to say, well, if you have a score and there is some other thing that we don't need at this point, and then we're taking the seconds since post added, and we want to render it at a kind of its minutes, right? We don't want to render by second, but we want kind of render by minutes because otherwise it's going to be too busy on the x-axis, and the numbers are just going to be really high if it's in minutes. And then the measure function, which is basically the y-axis, we're going to again take our score as input, and then we're going to just return the score value, right? And then once we have that, we need to provide the data, which is the scores, and that should be pretty much it. So this needs to be score. So that's pretty much it. And then there's one other thing we can do to customize the appearance a little bit. And again, this is very boilerplate. I'm going to just paste it in. We can make it blue. And that's what we need to convert that data. And then we're going to actually render the chart here. We need to prepare the chart data from the post scores. So we use our function, chart data, and pass the scores. And then we prepare the chart here. And as I mentioned, we're going to use a line chart. And we're going to parse the chart data. You might wonder why this is in an array. That is because we might render multiple charts kind of together. And we wanted to animate when it changes. It looks kind of nice. That's our chart. And now all we have to do here, where we put the to-do, right, where we put the placeholder for the chart, we just put the chart here. And at this point, we should be able to do this without rebuilding. And actually, we might have to rebuild because we added some scores, right? So let's do that, and then we run it, the Flutter app, and let's hope that this works. And if it does, we should be showing a chart with the scores of our fake posts, the fake scores of a fake post. And here we have our post showing our scores. Obviously, we don't want to use a fake post forever. That's not the idea. So we will now go ahead and start using some real posts. So first of all, we'll go and and remove all this fake stuff from our store create here. So, right, we're creating a bunch of, well, one fake post. So we don't need that anymore. And for now, we're just going to give it a empty map, right? Because initially we won't have any posts. And then we'll start converting this message into a real with message. So first of all, we need also a reply, because that's how they work together, right? You have message reply. So create an enum there. And then let's put a little comment here to separate these nicely. So we got a message. Then we obviously need to make this a proper read message via an attribute. And then we get to give it the type of reply that we want to use for this message. And here we set up the reply. And also we make this a proper read reply via an attribute. All right, so now we are ready here. And let's think about the messages that we're going to have. So for now, we're only going to allow watching a post. That's all we're going to do. And so we have this start watching with an ID, with the post ID that we want to start watching, right? No, sorry, actually a URL, right? It's going to be the post URL, and we're going to get the ID and then start watching it. Now, here we need to think about what would be the replies. Well, there's two options, right? So one is we started watching the post successfully. So let's do that, and we'll pass the. So this one will be used for the rec ID to be passed, so we know which request this pertains to, this reply. And then the string will be the ID of the post that we started watching. And then the other option is that it failed, right? So we could have we could call it failed request. And we could use that for different requests as well. So use 64 again for the rec ID, and then the string to pass an error message here. Okay. And so then obviously we need to update our update method, no pun intended. And basically we're matching the message, right? The type of the message, matching that, and then we're going to do different things. So if we have only one type of message, and that would be here the URL of the post, and then we put that in a separate method. So we're going to say start watching. We're going to pass the rec ID because we need to respond with that later, and then the URL. Okay. So obviously we don't have the start watching method yet. And before we actually do that, I'm going to implement some little helper method here on the store. These are basically just there so we can easier get the read logs and the write logs. So we get the read log, read guard of the store. And those basically we'll just call store read, which is implemented automatically for us, but as you can see, the IntelliSense here, or the code assist, doesn't work very well. So that's why we are wrapping it in these methods, and you can see that then the code assist works much better. So this one's going to be the write guard, and it's going to be write. Okay. That'll just help us implementing the next parts. So now let's actually move this method down here. So start watching post, and call it start watching, and it's going to take the reg ID that we pass and the URL of the post we try to watch. And then, so we could start watching this post on this thread, right? On the main thread, we could say, okay, let's, make the request to Reddit, get the ID of the post, and so on. But now, if we do that's blocking, right? That's blocking on that main thread. We don't want to block the main thread. That's the same thread as our UI, so that would really not be a very good user experience. What we do instead, we're going to move this onto a different thread. So we spawn a new thread. Right, and we just do it here. Okay, so now what do we need to do here? First of all, we need to try to start watching, and I'm going to implement that here. And why is it try start watching? Well, because something could go wrong, right? The URL could be invalid. We could be not connected to the internet, right? So let's do that. So start watching just takes the URL and it returns a result of, we're going to use anyhow result of post, right? So if we are successful, we're going to get a post back. Otherwise, that's going to be an error, right? And obviously that's to do. All right. And now we can go ahead and use that method here, even though we haven't fully implemented it here. Match, try, start watching URL, right? So we're going to match on the result, and we're going to see how we handle each case. So if we got a good response back, successful, then we have a post here. Otherwise, we have an error, right? So let's handle the error case first. That's actually the easier one. So if something went wrong, we are going to post back to Dart and say, look, we got a failed request, right? And it was for this request. This is rec ID, and then this is the message, right? The error. And so that should be covering that case. Let's see, I'm missing a, yeah. And then here, it's a little more complex. So first of all, what we need to do, when we get a post, we need to insert it into the store and then basically reply back that we start watching. So let's actually first get the ID of the store post that we start watching. So we can get that from here, post.id. And then we could get the store here. So let's actually do it that way. And I'll talk a little bit about what to watch out for here. So we get the store getting, basically this is not actually stored directly, it's a write guard on the store. So that means while this is alive, no one else can read or write from or to the store. All right, so that's something to consider. And so then we are going to get the posts and insert our store. So now, obviously, we need to clone that ID because we are also going to use it here to send back a message. Reply started watching like ID and then the ID of the post, right? Now we can see that we are running still into prompts because here we're using the post, but here we still basically have we kind of moved out the ID of the post. So let's just go ahead and clone it. So now we are good here, right? So now what's happening is, so the store, we get the write log here, and the write log is alive until store goes out of scope. So basically still while we are sending the reply, which is probably not that slow, right? Because we just, once the method call completes, we're done. But we could still improve this and say, okay, well, only keep the store here. And so once we even get to this line now, another thread could already start using the store again. Another way would be to just say, inline this, right? So, and it didn't give me that option, but we could just say store write and inline like that. And that way we make sure we don't hold on to the store for longer than necessary. Some of you might be wondering why we are using a failed request here to kind of point out that something went wrong. So why are we not using something like with error, right? Or severe? Well, the thing is that this failure is directly related to this request, and that's why a failed request response actually makes sense, because then we can basically on the other end, on the Dart end, we can say, oh, this request trying to start watching a post went wrong. Whereas the error macro and the severe macro are more designed for cases where it's not directly related to requests. So later on, we'll be basically ticking scores. We'll be polling scores. And so there's no direct request related to that. And if something goes wrong there, that's how we can communicate that. Also, it could be that there is an error, but it's not fatal. It's somewhat related to requests, but we still return a response that's valid. And so we don't want to fail the entire request. So for those cases, these macros are useful. And now let's go ahead and implement the try start watching method. So fortunately, we already have this pretty much done. We just need to use our query page method that we implemented earlier. And now what does it return, right? It returns a result here. But the result is very, well, it could be, very, very kind of generic, right? Page was missing title, things like that. So we don't really know what we were actually doing, like exactly. So what we're going to do, we're going to map this error. There's another way we could do this. We could just use a context and say something like this, trying to get page, right? But then we're losing the information about the original error. So what we can do instead is map error, and we're going to get the original error here, and then we can create a new error from that, and we're going to say anyhow. This is how with anyhow we can create errors, and we can say failed to get valid page data. Let's just get rid of that pop up there, and then the error we add on a new line, and now we can basically parse the URL and the error. Okay, now we need to import. It doesn't allow us to do that, so let's see. Let's clean up a few things here. I'm not using this anymore. I'm not using this. All right. So that's basically how we can get mapped that to an error, and obviously then we need to follow that with a question mark, right, to handle the error and or basically return that error in case there was one. Otherwise, we just keep going on. And so the next thing, well, first of all, what I want to do here is I want to kind of log that this actually worked, right? So that it's also useful for when you're actually running this app to see what's going on under the hood. So we're gonna just say that we got this page for this URL, and we got the ID was a certain ID, and just to kind of, just to show that things are starting to work. So URL, and then we got the page ID, right? And let's see why it's still unhappy. So and then now we're going to let's just return. So we need to return a post, right? So let's create a new post here, and the post will have an ID which is the same as a page ID. It will have a title, same as a page title. It is a URL, same as a page URL. And it has scores, but for now we don't have them. We actually will get them later. Now, one thing is still missing. So scores. One thing is still missing here from this post. It's going to tell us actually we're missing a field added. So when was a post added? Well, it's added basically right now. So what we're going to do is system time now. Okay, and so we're going to write that as well. Okay, so now we create a post, and all we have to do now is return that as a result. Okay, so now we got everything implemented. We got a warning still. Let's see where that is. Okay, we're still not using the read wrapper here, but we don't worry about that. So now we can start watching a post, and we are already adding it to the we are already adding it to our posts, right? When we get one here, right? So we are pretty much good on the Rust side. So now how do we connect this to our Dart end? Well, if you said Cubit, you were indeed correct. So what we'll do is we create a new Cubit, and we're going to call it add post. And so let's look here. We got Cubit, add post, and we start with the state. So this one's actually a little more interesting than the previous states we did so far. So basically what we have, well, we have a base class, right? And then we have another one, and we're going to call that actually add post inactive. That means we're not currently adding any posts. And that one does have nothing, no extra properties, right? And then we're going to have another state, which is actually if we are in the process of adding a post. So the user wanted to add a post, we sent the message to Rust, but we haven't heard back yet, right? Because it's asynchronous. So in that case, we do have a URL that we want to add, right? And so let's create a constructor for that. And then we have another one that is, let's copy this part out, and we call it the add post succeeded, right? So those are the two outcomes. The other one obviously is that the add post failed. So let's just write them out first and then look at what we need to add there. So these are the two possible outcomes from pending. And so if it succeeded, right, we do have a post now. So let's add that to the, well, first of all, we need to import the library. And then we can create the constructor. And in this case, we need to call, in all these cases, actually, we need to call super. So here also we need to call super, right? And here as well. And now if the post add post failed, we still have a URL, right? We still have that because of the post we're trying to add. And then also we're going to have an error, right? Or at least an error message. Right? So let's put that here. And let's create the constructor. And I'm wondering why it's not automatically already calling super. It should. Maybe because it doesn't take any parameters, so it's optional. Okay, that's fine. So as you can see, right, we are not adding, that's inactive. Then we start adding, it's pending, and then it either goes to succeeded or failed. And obviously at that point, then after that, it needs to go back to inactive. Cool. So now let's go and implement the Cubit. So in this case, we'll start with, it's called initial here, but we call it inactive, right? So we're not doing anything. So that's the Cubit when it gets created. And then we will add a post, and that is going to be asynchronous. So we will return a future, and we're going to pass a URL. And then what we're going to do first of all is, okay, we're about to add a post, so it's pending now, right? So we emit that state, and we pass URL. Okay, cool. So now we're in pending mode. Then we're going to go ahead and invoke that method on the store. Okay, so we don't have a store. Let's create one. Store equals store dot. There's only one store, so we can use a singleton instance. And then I say store.message. Okay, so let's see why it's not happy here. So this should be a store. Oh, it's not happy because we didn't run bindgen. And also, well, when we do that, we should probably just also compile the binary. So it didn't know about these methods yet that we implement on the Rust side because we forgot to run bindgen. So now it should actually already have them. Let's see. So here we have, right? We have the message start watching, pass URL. And so one thing to note about these messages, there is an optional parameter here, a duration that we can pass. If you don't pass it, it actually uses a default duration. However, in this case, since we're going to have to go to the Reddit API, get the URL, get the ID of the post and so on, it might take a while. So we don't want to timeout immediately. Right? So we're going to actually increase that timeout to a duration of a few seconds. So let's say up to 10 seconds. After 10 seconds, something really went wrong. And what we're going to do, we're going to be good citizens, and we're going to say, well, this is because requests to Reddit can be slow, especially on not so great internet, which in my case, I actually have that more than not. And then we are going to pass in the timeout here. But we need to name it, so timeout, okay. And so we got that part done. Now we have to handle the response that we get. So we got the response. We actually need to sign that. And now we're going to switch on the type of the response. Okay. Oh, we need to await it, right? So it's asynchronous, so we're going to get a future back. So pull out the response, and we are actually going to add all the case clauses. And there are two options here. One is start watching, failed request is the other one. But in the future, we might add more responses. And actually, if we get anything back, then these two, something went really wrong. So what we'll do is we'll throw just an argument error. We got back something invalid here. We're going to pass the rest type and start watching, right? Just to get some idea where to look when something went wrong. And we got an invalid reply. Right? So that's how we handle that case. So basically what this means, if you go to the value here, constructor is, what's the value that you had, which was the invalid type, right? And then what's the name of the function that we were basically working with, and then the message, right? And so the name was kind of started watching. We got the reply. It's not really a function, but it will help us enough to figure out what went wrong. Now, when we started watching, what we need to actually make sure, first of all, is that the data is not null, right? Because that will return us the post ID. And so we're going to say a successful reply should include post ID. And so now we can say we're going to get our post, right? Store posts from rest.data. So now we can pull out that post. So the data will now be the post ID, right? And then we can then assert that the post was not null, right? The post now should have been there. And we do this in order to fail fast, right? So if something goes wrong, we want to fail right at the earliest moment that we can figure out that something is not correct, right? So watch post should be in the map. And then we're going to admit that the add post succeeded, right? And we're going to have to pass a post. And the thing is that even though we have an assert here, and we know now that the post will not be null, in production, these asserts are actually not going to be in the code. And so the post could be null. But right, we know that if this works in debug, we're going to assume in debug mode, and we may have an assert here, it works in production as well, right? Because these are basically errors that are programmer errors, right? If this is not true, that's not because something went wrong on the network or anything. That's actually because we made a programmer mistake. And so we make sure we don't make them during debug mode, and then in production mode, we just assume that it's still the case. So now the next thing here is when we have the failed request, we actually need to do something somewhat similar here. We need to make sure that, first of all, we got a data, because the data will have the information about our error, right? So failed reply should include the error message, right? And next of all, we're going to also assume that the state is add post pending, right? And if it wasn't, it shouldn't fail, right? With this message, because why, right? Only fail if it was pending. And actually, technically, we should only also get this reply here if we were pending. But I mean, in a way, this is sort of kind of weird, right? Because we are actually emitting it right here. But let's just keep it in. And next, we're going to add post failed as a state, right? And so we need to, and basically we just made sure, because here we can see that we are actually casting it. And so we're going to give the result data. And again, here we know that it's now not null. So the thing is, like, whenever you do an S, it's probably the best to first check that it is actually this. Otherwise, it will fail without a nice error message. So here, if it wasn't add post pending for whatever reason, we fail with a good message. Otherwise, we wouldn't. And then now we can cast it and we can pull out the UL to have a more meaningful error message. And so this is basically the whole idea of the post qubit. And next, we're going to hook this up to the view. And now we can go ahead and add the add post view. So we're going to add that here. And again, this one has so much boilerplate in it that it's best to just copy paste it in. And we walk through it and explain the important parts. So this one is a stateful widget, and the reason is because it has a text field controller, which we'll use to enter the URL of the post that we're trying to add. And then it basically just wraps a floating action button, which if we press it, shows a dialog. So let's look at that real quick. So the dialog just basically gives us a text field and the option to, basically enter the URL, and it has like a little hint and so on. And then if you basically entered the URL successfully as a user, then it sets it and it pops in order to close the dialog, right? And so then it makes sure that the URL is at least not null or empty, and if not, it will actually try to add that post. Now, if anything fails on the Rust end, right, we won't get any state changes, right? But what will happen instead, it will basically send us a failed request reply, and in that case, the qubit will emit a add post failed message. And we are listening to that message here via a block listener. And so we are wrapping basically our child we're wrapping basically this add icon. We're wrapping that with that block listener. So in case something goes wrong, we will show a snack bar to at least alert the user. Nothing else needs to be done, because if it went wrong on the Rust end, no state was updated, right? So we still don't have the post added, but at least we should tell the user. And that's pretty much all there is to this dialog or to the view. And now we just need to hook this all up, and we're going to go to main. And first of all, we need to add the block provider, right? So because we have a new one, and as I mentioned, I already knew that we would need that, and we already have a multi-block provider here. So we just add the add post qubit here, and creation is really simple. Add post qubit. Good. And now obviously we need to be able to add it somewhere. So we add a floating action button. Floating action button. And we are basically just giving it our post at post view. Might need to import that. Okay. All right, and then we want to make sure that it appears in the center. Floating action button location, floating action button location, location, center, float. Okay, so that's all we need to do here. So we should actually be able to run this. We did run bindgen and we recompiled the binary. So one might think that this should work now, right? So let's see. Okay, so it started up fine and much faster than usual due to some little video tricks. And now we should be able to add a post. So I'm going to paste in a valid URL here. and nothing happens. But we can see that we got a started watching message here. So this, well, first of all, we got a log message here, which is important that we added that. We can see that actually this got an ID and all these things. And then we got a posted reply, which was started watching, so it was valid. So let's actually try to add a non-existing URL or something. And we can see that it failed to add the post, and it actually also gives us a message here. So actually, things are working somewhat. And we're going to keep this running, and we're going to find out what's going on without even restarting the app. Maybe we can just fix it. So one thing that we haven't considered is, well, how will the posts qubit actually know to refresh, right? We have a refresh method here, but it only runs once. But basically what we need to do, we need to tell it that whenever a post was added or maybe removed, we need to actually update, right? So let's add something here to make that happen. So actually we're going to start with a subscribe method we're going to implement. So subscribe, and what that will do, it will update, it will subscribe to post updates. So basically we're going to go to the reply channel, which is on the RID global. So we have a reply channel here, and we're going to go to the stream and say whenever we get a reply where the reply type is reply.started watching, right? Then I want you to listen to that. We don't need the reply itself, so we can ignore that. And then I just want you to go and refresh. That's all we need to do. And obviously to make this, we need to call it. And then also to make it proper, we need to assign this subscription to something, and make sure that we also unsubscribe from it whenever this qubit gets disposed. So let's do that. So we're going to create a, the way we're going to do it, we're just going to assign it here for now, and then figure out what the type is. That's actually easier. So we're going to call this a post post added or removed. It's a little long, but this be very descriptive. Later on, we're going to use this also for the case where it gets removed. And now we're going to add the type annotation. Okay, so now we got that. Copy that out. That's a little trick with these large types to get them. At least that's what I use sometimes. And then it's going to be a late final, and it's going to be private. And then all we have to do here is use it, post added or removed. Okay, cool. So now we got a proper variable. So it's not used, well, because we are not disposing it properly yet. So what we actually need to do is have a override the close method. The close method. So future void close. That's the method that is part of the qubit. And we are going to unsubscribe. And we don't have that implemented yet, but we'll do so in a second. And then we return super the close. And now let's implement the unsubscribe. And we're going to put that right below subscribe. And I always do it like this. Wherever we create a resource that we need to clean up later, it's best to just put the cleanup method right below it so we know easily that we have it. So then we're going to take the post added or removed sub, and we are going to close it, or actually we're going to cancel. We're going to make sure that it's not null, and then we're actually going to set it null. Post added or removed and null, so make it nullable. So basically what we're doing, making sure that in case we already did this, we don't do it twice. And so there you go. And yeah, that's pretty much all we need to do here. It's funny that it allows us to still be final, right? Because we're actually assigning it twice. But with final, we want to signal that, right, we're assigning it once when we construct the qubit, and then we are only cleaning it up at the very end. So now the question is, why is this not happy? Well, because we need to return a future. Okay, so now without even restarting, we couldn't. I don't think a hot reload will work here because we are changing something about the qubit. And obviously we need to, well, we need to add a post again. So let's try to add the same one. Let's see what happens. So that worked, but it still didn't update. And that's because we probably have to hot restart in order to refresh. Okay, now we actually already have something. Well, that's because of hot restart. It now picked up the existing post. So we need to add another one. So I'm going to pull out another one here. I'm going to add that. And now it worked, right? We got the start watching reply, and we started watching. And now we're going to go ahead and implement removing the post. But we're going to have to close the app because we are going to have to make changes on the Rust end to do that, so we need to restart. I actually double-checked my assumptions about the late final, and they were wrong. So we don't get a compile error here, even though we are assigning to this subscription here twice, one time here and the other time here. So it doesn't give us a compile time error, but it actually would give us a runtime error. And I confirmed that with a little example that I created. So we have a class here, we have x, and we're assigning it here, and we're assigning it again. We're assigning it hello, and then we're assigning it again here. And if I run that, it gives me a late initialization error. So we need to fix that and remove the final from here entirely. And then we should be fine. We just never hit this because this qubit doesn't get disposed because it's pretty much alive for as long as the app is running, because it gets created once right here when we create the app, and then it's not like ever collected or disposed. Now where we added the ability to start watching a post, we should add one to also stop watching a post. So we'll go to our Rust code, and first of all add a message, start watching. Pretty much the same like we have start, except it's stop. And then there's going to be a reply that goes along with it, stop watching. Okay, and now you can see we're already getting some warnings here, and it's basically the compiler guiding us, right? So we have a match statement here in the update method, and we're missing the stop watching. We're not handling that yet. So let's implement that. And in this case, we're getting the ID passed to us, and what we'll have to do is remove the post, right? Which is pretty straightforward. So we just get our posts and remove the one with that ID, and then we're going to send a reply that we are done removing the post, right? Post reply stop watching. We're gonna give it the request ID, and we're gonna send back the ID of the post we removed, even though whoever made the request should know what that ID is. But just to be, to rule out errors, someone could double check the ID that got removed, that it's the correct one. So let's see where we got an error. Okay, we still got this warning here, which we don't care about. Let's actually move on to the Dart one. And first of all, we are going to bindgen again and build our macOS binary. And now what we're going to have to do is extend our post state to basically have a removed state. So let's add up our post state file here, and we're going to add another class. Instead of post active, it's going to be post removed. And this one will actually only have a post ID, because the post was removed, so we don't have the post anymore. And obviously, let me just actually get rid of this, and we are going to create a constructor, and obviously need to then initialize our super. Well, the super has a URL, so we'll need a URL here, right? And super post ID and URL. Okay, and now I actually want to also encode how to get to this post removed. We can only get to it actually from an active post, right? We can never get there before we before the post was active. We can never go directly to the state, right? So let's add that here, and we have a post is basically the current active post, and then we'll return post removed from post ID and post URL. Okay, so we could also make this constructor private like this, so we will enforce that you have to use this method, but for now we won't do that, but that's just an option we have. And now what we can actually do, we can do something that looks a little bit like Rust, where we can go from one data type into another. So post removed, and we call it into post removed. And so what that does is just calls this method post removed from post active, and we pass this. Okay, now we got this set up, and why this is nice is because we are encoding basically the possible state transitions that we support. And now we need to obviously implement the logic for this, and that is done in the post cubit and post cubit. And first of all, we'll need a store. Because now we actually will send messages and so on. And as you can see, we start with an active post. And now we're going to add something that we already did similarly elsewhere. We're going to add some refresh method, call it refresh state, async. Okay, and that is basically to refresh the post state after it was removed or whatever, right? But let's actually focus on this method to do that, to remove the post first. So stop watching, we'll call it. And since it will send a message and it will basically wait for the outcome, it is async. And so first of all, we're making sure that the current state is post active, right? We can only remove a post that is active. And then we are going to pull out our post out of the active state. And then we're going to go ahead and send the message, store message. And as you can see, we need to maybe rerun Bindgen, or it just didn't update it. Let me see. Okay, now we have it, right? So sometimes we don't get the added API in our code assist here right away, so we have to jump to that file to remind them that something changed. And so then we're going to refresh the state after we're done. Okay, so we're sending the message, and then we refresh the state, and only when we're done with that can we update the actual state of our post removed. So we do that, and then we'll we return true here, and we'll see in a second why this method even wants us to return a boolean. It has to do with the dismissible. So that's basically what we're doing here, and as we can see, we are ignoring the result of the message because we don't care, right? In this case, as we can see, when we remove a post, there's no no reply, like a failed request or anything like that, because it's, nothing can really go wrong. There's no request to the network or anything that we're doing. And now we can implement our, basically we have to do the same thing here. And yeah, basically we do something somewhat similar. Make sure that the post is active. We can only refresh active posts. And then we'll pull out the active post. We actually, when we assign it to a separate variable, it's a little different than below, but still similar. And then we basically get the post active dot post ID. So what we're doing here is we are updating our post, right? So we're not taking our existing post, we're just taking the ID of our existing post in order to query the store for the updated state, because we want to refresh the state, right? And now there are two outcomes. The post could actually be null, which means it was removed in the meantime, which means we didn't find it anymore in the hash map, right? So then we actually need to emit post active dot into removed. And then here, if it's was still active, we can emit post active post. And why do we even emit something here if the state didn't change, right? If the post is still there and it was there before, well, the scores might have changed, right? So we have to emit an update. Basically, we got the latest scores included with the post, and we need to update our AI with those, right? So now there are just two small pieces missing, so we'll already start our app. And we'll jump over to the post view. And here we basically have to implement confirm dismiss, which means when the user is trying to dismiss a post, we'll go ahead and call our post qubit and let it know that we want to remove that post, right? We want to stop watching it. And what we'll do here, and this is why, and now our app started up here, and this is why we are returning a bool here, because the confirm dismiss function has a confirm dismiss callback, well, which returns a bool, a future of a bool, and so that's why we implemented it that way. So we can just call it like this. And so basically what's happening is before the Flutter app accepts the dismissal, it will actually wait for this function to complete. And one final thing is now missing, is updating the post qubit, right? The post qubit at this point is only listening to the event that we started watching a post. But we basically need to say, well, also if the type of reply, right, is stop watching, then you should also update and refresh. So basically what's happening, right, we're listening to the stream, and so this is not request bound, right? So anything that happens on the Rust side, if one of the replies to any request is started watching or stop watching, we don't care here where this came from, but we just want to make sure that we noted that it happened. And then we need to update the posts, the list of posts. So now we can go ahead and see if that works. So we're going to add a post to our app here, and we're going to remove it. So let's add one, and we should be seeing that. And then it's another one. All right, and so now we are watching two posts, and we want to remove that one. Right, slide it over, and it's gone. And that worked flawlessly. We didn't get a warning here, so the dismissible is working correctly, and we're moving it in time. Otherwise, if you don't remove some item from a list in time, basically the dismissal completes, and you happen to have that item still on your list, you would get a warning message here. And this is why we did it the way we did it in the view here, where we are confirming the dismiss only after the stop watching has completed. That is important. As you could see though, our posts still show no scores, so we need to implement the actual polling of scores. So for that, first let's jump back to Rust. And in order to start watching scores, we're going to add a message called initialize. And the reason why we initialize, we could say, well, why don't you just do that when you create the store, right? But as you can see, we cannot pass anything in here. And also this has to happen synchronously. We also don't want any errors here. And additionally, when we initialize, later on, we'll actually take an argument in order to pass something in from Flutter. In our case, we'll pass in the path to the directory where we can create the database where we will later on store the post data and the scores of the posts. And so therefore, we do it this way. So, and then what we'll also have to have is a reply for that, right? We initialized, and then we'll just take request ID. And so we got those set up. And now go to the, we'll go to the store update method, but first we want to add a field here to the store. And so what we'll want to keep track of is if we are polling already, right? Because we don't want to start polling for scores more than once. We don't want to have more than one polling thread going on. So we want to guard against it a little bit. So we got that, well, we're not polling false. But what we also want to do, we don't want to include that in the store on the Dart side. So what we actually can do is we can say skip a specific field from showing up in our Dart classes, right? So what we can do, we can make our store fields configurable with this, and we can then say rid skip. And if we wouldn't have this here, this derive, this rid field or this rid attribute wouldn't be available. So that's why we need to add that. Okay, now we got that implemented, and we can go ahead and implement the handling of that message we added. So message initialize, let's put on the top because it will happen before anything, most likely. And so what we'll do here is we're going to make sure, right, only if you're not polling already, then we'll, first of all, we make sure that, right, we are now polling, and we'll poll posts, right? And that method we still have to implement. And let's put a little comment here. Okay, so now we need to obviously implement this polling method, and we're going to put that into the Reddit module. Okay, so here we got that. Well, first of all, this one will actually go, so we'll have to have a polling interval, and we'll put that here as a constant. So we're going to say pop const resolution millis and we're going to every 5,000 milliseconds, which means every second, we're going to poll. And now what we'll need to do is put the poll posts method somewhere, and we will basically add that on the bottom of this file. We could, or we could just actually add it right where we were in our right here. Right, we have start watching post, so we're going to have polling scores, right, and we'll just put that there. And this one I will actually just paste in, and we'll walk through this because this is quite a lot of code. Let me actually copy it and paste. All right. Yeah. Post version. Okay, cool. So I will walk through this method. Query score we already implemented, so we just pull that in. Okay. Okay, so let's go through this piece by piece. First of all, we are logging that we started that thread, which could be useful, right, to have. And we'll basically, what we do here is first we query all the post IDs, and we just take a read log on the score, which allows other threads, and including the main thread, to still read from the store at the same time. So only once we did that, and that's like a minor optimization that might not be necessary, but only once we did that, then we actually will go ahead and iterate and take the write log on the store when we need to write to it. So here we can see that we first get all the scores. And let's just look through it. It's not too complicated. We just take the ID of each post, right? So we're getting all the posts. And then we query the score, right? Now, query the score actually goes to the network, right? It gets URL, it gets an API response, and all these things. So this could take some while, right? So definitely we wouldn't want to have a write log on the store while that's going on. So then we return a tuple with the ID of the post and the score. And then only where we got actually a result, right? Actually here we are trying to match on the score response. So did we actually get a valid score or scores in that case? And actually it's a score. So we get one score here, right? And then if we did so, we return some. Otherwise, we return an error. Actually, we convert the error to a none, right? Which allows us to filter map, right? So that's basically what we're doing here. Okay, did we get a valid score, or did we get an error? And filter the ones with an error out, but log also an error. So we know something went wrong, all right? But there's nothing really we can do, and it's also not that fatal. So we can probably keep going. We just didn't get a score for that particular post. Might be that, the internet was kind of shaky for a second or something like that. And then now finally we are at the part where we can take a write log on the store, and we need to import the score here. We already have that struct, and so what we do here is we take a write log, and now we go through all the scores that we got, and associated with the store, post ID, and if the posts don't have the post with that ID, well, we can't do anything. It could have been that while we were getting the score for a post, right, the user removed the post and now it's no longer there. So we need to check for that. And then we take a timestamp, right, for the score. And then we basically just get the post, right? And now we know it's there. And we have a write log on the store, so no one could remove it from here to here, right? The post will be there. And then we calculate the timestamp in relation to when the post was originally added, right? Take the seconds, and then we create the score from that right here, right? And we add that to the existing scores of the post. And then we have we send the reply updated scores, which we haven't implemented yet. And then we need to import time here, and the resolution millis, which we just created. And so basically we just say, okay, we update the scores, we're done, right? And then we sleep for however long we're supposed to, according to the resolution that we want. Okay, so now what's missing still is the updated scores reply. So let's put that here, updated scores. And so you can see that this is not directly related to initialize or anything. It's not like initialize, it's updated scores, right? And the reason is because this is not a response to a particular request. It happens just every 5 seconds in our case. So it's that kind of a reply. And so now obviously we're still missing up here we need to reply that we initialized, right, our store now to poll, and whatever else we will initialize in the future. So we'll just have to add with post reply initialized we pass the request ID, and then we're done. So that should be everything that we need to do on the Rust side. And in order to make sure that everything still compiles, we're going to go ahead and bindgen and build our binary. And then we should be ready to go on to implement the Dart code that will use the feature we just added down here. All right, so let's jump over to our post qubit, because that's where we're going to have to implement that logic. And it is somewhat similar. So we already did something similar in the posts qubit. So where we have basically a subscription, right? And we're listening to posts added or removed. And in the post qubit, this is now very, very similar. So I'm actually going to go ahead and to speed this up, copy some code that I already prepared into here. So we have a subscription, right? And we call it store ticks sub. And we use it to subscribe and unsubscribe to basically updates on for the score of the post. So the subscribe method will basically just make sure that we only subscribe once, right? Make sure of that. And then we again, as in the posts qubit, right, where we listen to the stream for a specific kind of reply. In the post qubit, we do something very similar, except that it's updated scores. And the interesting thing is that it tells us that it doesn't exist. Yeah, so Vim just didn't update yet. So now we have it. Updated scores. And so if that reply is of that type, then we want to go ahead and refresh our state, right? And the refresh state doesn't have to change. It's basically, once we refresh it, as we said before, we get an updated post with the updated scores, right? And then unsubscribe is here to be able to clean up the subscription and also make sure we only do that once, so we assign it to null. And since we have now these unsubscribe method, we need to make sure that it actually gets called when the post qubit gets closed or disposed, however you want to call it. And so we make sure we unsubscribe and we call the super. And that's really all there is to this. It's not too complicated, just somewhat boilerplatey, so it made sense to just copy it in. And so now all that's missing now is in the main function, right? We need to make sure that we actually initialize our store. So then and it is in a future that it returns because we're going to send a message. So we need to make our main method async. And then we're going to say store.instance dot message, and we want to initialize. And at this point, we don't pass anything yet, but as I mentioned before, eventually we will. And let's go ahead and run our app. I think I'm missing something. Yeah, I'm missing something up here. An import. Let's see if we can get this. We have to probably restart it. And also what we're still missing, obviously, is we need to subscribe in the constructor in order to get these updates, right? So we do that. With this, and we have to wait now for this to start up. But in the meantime, I'll copy a URL for a post we're going to use. All right, we started up. We might still be running the version that doesn't subscribe. So we're going to have to see. Okay, so we got it. See. We didn't get, well, post to reply. We didn't get initial. Or did we? Okay, we got the initialized here, right? We don't. Let's see if we get the update. We don't get the update yet. So I think what we may have to do is actually hard restart, because I just added that subscribe to the constructor. Okay, so now we got some scores. All right, but that's because we hard restarted. So we actually need to wait a little bit to see if this actually works. But it definitely should. So let's see if we get another score here. And we probably should have changed our update to be a little more often than 5 seconds. But what we're going to do is we're going to put here a refresh state. Okay, so we should actually get updates. but it looks like we don't. So let's investigate what's going on here. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a refresh here, just a print, debug print, just to see if you're actually refreshing. And for that we need material. All right. Okay, so let's do a hard restart. And see, we got actually all these posts as well. Okay, now we got. Okay, now it's working, right? So for some reason, okay, so the score is just the same, and it's showing it in minutes. Okay, now we can see it's actually updating. So okay, one other thing I wanted to show, right? We have some really good error handling still going on. If I add some URL that just doesn't exist, right? We get actually failed add post like we did before. Things still work as before and give good user errors. Yeah, I think we are done with that. And now we will make sure that this app actually works on other devices as well. So let me close it down. Let me remove this. We don't need that anymore. It's working. Now we have the first version of the app working as we like. It's probably ideal to check out that it works on devices that we want to support. So I already have an iOS emulator running here, and let's just make sure that we can run it there. So what I'm going to look at is Flutter devices list. And we're going to start that up, and you can see we got this iPhone emulator running, and we just copy that and tell Flutter to run it on that. And we're going to see that actually we're going to run into a little problem here, because Flutter, the latest Flutter somehow seems to have problems finding the symbols of our Rust that we include. So we're going to get an error message here, but there's a way to make this work anyway. So we get an error message here with a bunch of things that I don't fully know why they are happening. But we can basically now go ahead and run this with Xcode directly. So we can open the runner workspace in Xcode. And actually, at that point, we can then close our emulator down, because when we run it from Xcode, it's called a simulator. When we run it from Xcode, we can actually go ahead and select here which simulator we want to use, and it will just open it up. So it's building, and this is the same project, right? Except that we're running it directly in Xcode here. And now it actually succeeded in building. It's launching our runner here, and let's copy a post we want to go ahead and use. Make sure it actually starts running. And while this is starting up, I'm going to go ahead and show the builds could be using. So we have a macOS that I've been using all along, right? And it's building for macOS target. And the iOS one is similar, except that it builds for an iOS target. There are other targets we can build for iOS, but this one is the one that works for the emulator. So now we have our app started up here, and we should be able to add a post now. I'm just going to paste it in. And there you go, it's showing up. And if we look at our logs here, well, actually, the logs are now in Xcode, right? So we now have the logs in here, right? Same as we had them before, except now they're logging down here. Okay, so that is the iOS version running. And next we need to make sure that the Android version I'm going to use a tool called str copy in order to show my Android screen. So here we can see my Android phone that I have here next to me. And so we're going to keep that running. And at the same time, we are going to, obviously we need to build for Android. We did this, by the way, earlier for the iOS version, obviously, as well. So we're building for Android now. And actually, let's look over here what this is building for the devices, right? To show that which one is actually our Android device. And it's taking a bit. And we can see we got the Android here, Android 10, so the pixels. So we're going to copy that string out. And I'm going to use that now over here. So now it's compiled, right? So now we can say Flutter run, and we're going to use that device. And so while that is starting up again, I'm going to show the Android version for this. And actually right now what we're going to see is this might not actually work. And I'm going to stop this right away because what we forgot is to change the build script to build for the correct Android device. So the one that's selected here is useful for emulators. Yeah, I think they're called emulators, or right, the one that's running on your computer. However, this one here is the one that we actual, this one here is what we actually need for the pixel. So let's actually go ahead and clean that out. And we need to build again, right? Because we built for the wrong target. And then we're going to go ahead and run that again on our Android, and we should see it start up. Okay, so now we'll do the same thing as we just did. Let's start it up. And via the magic of video editing, we already started up now. So let's look at our application running. So this is on the phone running on the Android. And let's go ahead and add a post. Oh. All right. Paste that in. And voila, we got a post running here. We're watching the scores. And again, let's show the iOS running as well. All right, and we know that it's running on macOS native. And we can see here that this was already running for a while and is now has collected a bunch of data. The score didn't change. This is just basically Reddit jitter. The score is not exact that it shows, so you can see it's a little jitterish. Okay, so we showed that it's running on all the devices we want. And next, we are going to add persistence, meaning that we will store the scores and data about a post that we added in the database so that whenever we restart the app, it actually can load it from there. And thus we can see the longer history of posts.